Hey guys, it's Drew. Thank you for checking out the Sober Fix podcast, where we talk about addiction and living life sober, one day at a time. If you like what you hear, go ahead and follow us. And if you get some time, check out our Instagram page at the Sober Fix podcast, and also our YouTube and TikTok at the Sober Fix. Hope you enjoy the episode. What is up, everyone? Thank you for checking out another episode of the Sober Fix. It is Drew. I hope everyone is doing well. I appreciate anyone coming on here listening to episodes. I always love having guests on here. It makes my job a lot easier. It used to just be me sitting here talking to myself for 45 minutes. And I realized, man, I want to have some other people on here, some new experiences, some new stories, some new victories and good stuff like that. So today we've got another guest on. We've got Tonyah Dee, Yahdee is the last name. And Tonyah is a registered dietitian, master meditation teacher, life coach, singer-songwriter, and author. Tonyah, how are you doing?
I'm doing great, Drew. Thanks so much for asking and having me on your podcast.
Absolutely. And we were just talking about it before we started, but you're busy. You do a lot of cool stuff.
I have. It's been a journey, from one cool thing to the next cool thing. So that's what it's been like to get, clean from anxiety and all the behaviors. So you're not I wasn't wasting my energy doing all of that stuff and could really focus more on creative projects.
Yeah. And I'm someone that always had anxiety. I couldn't put a finger on it for a lot of years. I kind of had this underlying uneasiness, which eventually led me into self-medicating and turning to alcohol. And of course, it took me a long time to realize that. Did you always have anxiety? When did you realize that that's what you were dealing with?
My anxiety started when I was 14 and my parents went through a divorce, or, my family went through a divorce. And I was essentially abandoned at 14. My mom found someone right away, and so did my dad. My family fell apart. And I recognized that's really when my anxiety started.
Yeah. So it kind of started from the divorce, from the stress of all that, the family breaking up and stuff.
Exactly. Yeah, it was for sure a way of coping. Was all the behaviors that, sometimes we use to calm our anxiety. So all of those behaviors started, and I had none of those before 14. So, yeah, I started really running a lot, like running all the time. So I had this need to run, which was probably fight or flight, all that cortisol in my body, and that eventually led to anorexia, and that led to bulimia, and at the same time, smoking weed to calm it all down. And then, various drugs came along that did something, but it was definitely all a way to avoid the pain that I was experiencing that I didn't even realize, like this, that I had so much pain and anxiety. You get so caught up in just taking care of it, right? So, yeah, I had those behaviors for a really long time and kind of went away. Some went away, like I became a registered dietitian, and that that journey kind of helped me into seeing the eating piece. And then I gave my life to Jesus, and that brought in like a spiritual piece and kind of a new mindset, which I really needed. Then I got into psychotherapy. But right about that time I went through a divorce, and my anxiety came back like full force. And I think that happens to us sometimes as an adult. We'll get triggered and we have something already stored in our body. And I had a lot of anxiety. I was just coping with it well now. And it came back. I was actually diagnosed with an anxiety disorder, like after my divorce.
Yeah, and I want to ask you too about the eating disorder, if that's all right.
Oh, yeah.
When did you notice? Was there other people that were they saying, "Hey, look, you're losing too much weight. I never see you eat," stuff like that, or was it did you yourself kind of notice, "Oh, this is becoming a problem"?
It's crazy at the beginning. Everybody's like, oh, you look great. And that kind of fuels an eating disorder. You're thin, you look healthy. I was running a lot. And so for a while, I just was deceiving myself that everything was fine. I wasn't eating a lot. And then if I ate too much, I'd try to throw it up. And then when I got to college, it really, like, I think the anxiety of like going away to college too kicked in. And then I was really in a pattern of starving myself, running, really avoiding the sense of loneliness and isolation that I had, that was creating my anxiety. And I eventually just changed my major in college to science, and because I was like, what is going on with me? And became a registered dietitian. And then I specialized in eating disorders for quite a long time, helping other people.
That's really cool. I was going to ask you about that as a dietitian and having that unique experience. Are there a lot of people that are suffering from eating disorders? Is there more than most people would realize, do you think?
I think definitely, our culture is sort of geared to almost promote an eating disorder. Whether it's, all the images that we see on TV, the magazines, social media, the culture is constantly saying this is the right way to look, or it's getting better for sure. But that's one thing. And then in certain areas where, there's not a lot of healthy food, and the type of food people eat can cause a certain brain chemistry that makes them eat those foods again, like high carbohydrate, high sugar, high fat. So that contributes. And then another thing that really contributes is our society, for a while, it's getting better, hasn't really promoted sharing feelings. Like, hey, how are you feeling today? And actually being able to say, well, I don't feel good, or I feel not cared for, like smaller feelings. I feel not listened to. I feel manipulated. I feel bullied. Like, I don't, these are the feelings that a lot of times causes a negative emotion in us. And that fuels, like, either, one of these things that we use to numb out emotional pain. So it's very, very common to have some sort of, not just an eating disorder, but maybe even a body image issue. Right, where you're not just like, I love my body. This is my body's my one body. I'm going to take care of it. It's not perfect. It'll never be perfect. But people really pick at themselves, like very critical. Like, I don't like my thighs. I don't like my butt. I don't like this about me. And that whole thing fuels this, circle of like a low feeling, like shame or guilt. And then you're off, eating the wrong foods and feeling guilty about that. So it's very prevalent one way or the other, to have some sort of eating issue.
Yeah, and I love talking about the eating issues and stuff because when I got sober from the drugs and alcohol, and I was in rehab, and of course in rehab everyone's saying eat this, like they're trying to get you to gain weight. A lot of us come in there just malnourished, and we haven't been eating right for a long time. And I remember being in rehab, and I started to realize that it's very close knit, the drug use and kind of the eating for comfort type stuff. And I can almost feel it sometimes today, where if I'm having a bad day or I'm feeling a little bit depressed or whatever, and I notice kind of, I don't have the drugs anymore. I'm 5 years clean and sober now, but I kind of notice, hey, look, I'm either bored or I'm having a bad day, and I just want to eat, you know.
Yeah. Yeah.
It,
The idea is, and you said it, is you notice that there's a relationship there. And that's the goal, you know. So if you do it, you've noticed it, you're aware that there's this impulse. But for a lot of people, there it's a impulse and they do it, and there's no awareness. Then there's guilt afterwards. So it's being able to increase that awareness constantly, bigger and bigger and bigger, like, oh, that now I'm very aware that when I'm bored or I'm tired or I just had a bad conversation with somebody that I want to eat, then you can start recalibrating your decision making because you're aware of the association. And then you get triggered and you say, well, I'm aware that I really just want to go eat, you know, X, Y, and Z, but I know that's not my best interest. It's a matter of like real self love, right? What is in my best interest right now? Take a nap, you know, let yourself eat and enjoy it. You know, it's not like a trigger. It's something like, hey, I'm going to take myself out to eat, you know, and there's no guilt afterwards. But that awareness is always the key. That you know, trigger might make you do this behavior. And just that same trigger could have been the trigger before that made you go for a drug, right? Or a person. So it's knowing those little things that just like, you know, have this impact on us to do something that's not really in the form of self-love.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and I like the way you put that. I was going to ask you too. You mentioned your anxiety kind of resurfacing itself during the divorce. Do you think that was because it was another kind of high stakes, high stressful situation, another big change that it kind of the anxiety kind of resurfaced?
Yes, it was all of that. So it was high anxiety, and it also, it for me, a trigger for me is being alone or being abandoned. So even though I wasn't really abandoned during my divorce, it was a mutual decision. Somewhere in me felt abandoned. It's an old wound that had not really been healed. Like I had overcome a lot of my real extreme behaviors, like an eating disorder or substance use, but the anxiety, the wound was still inside of me, and it retouched on that wound. And that happens a lot in adulthood. Will retouch a childhood wound. And ideally, if it's like, oh my gosh, I'm having a big reaction to this one thing in my life as an adult, it almost always is an indication that there's some stored wound in there that's not healed from your childhood. So it's like this wound plus this wound, and then it really can magnify itself. And, you know, my opinion, it magnifies to be healed, right? But we don't always know how to go about healing that thing. It can send us back into these old behaviors that don't really work for us anymore.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you too, how did you personally start healing from all that?
This is a great question because this was a real turning point in my life. I read a bunch of books on anxiety, and most of the books said meditation practice would really help. And this was 20 years ago when meditation wasn't that popular. So I really had to seek out, where to find how to meditate. And this sent me down this really different path. I ended up doing almost a 10-year yoga meditation training
Wow.
and becoming a master meditator. But during that period, earlier on, learning to meditate was so hard for me. So I want to tell your followers that, we say, oh, yeah, go meditate. And when you have anxiety or depression or a lot of emotional distress, it's very hard to meditate. So I could really only sit there for about max 5 minutes before I was like, I gotta go. This, my brain was like, go, go, go.
Yeah.
So, it was a matter of really committing to this one path. And this one training had us getting up at 4:30 in the morning every morning
Wow.
and doing some chanting that were kind of like prayers to God. They were in Sanskrit, a different language. And then that chanting actually releases a lot of relaxing chemicals throughout your body, just like singing it at a church or with a group of people. It feels good. And it kind of sets you up, or it totally sets you up to be able to meditate easier. So,
Interesting.
yeah, it's really interesting. And, there's monasteries around the world where, they're still chanting, and there's groups that chant now. And that's what I ended up doing is creating my own devotional chant music during this time period in English, because all of the devotional chant music out there is in like these different languages. And so this is the turning point, though. I was just sitting there one morning, and, it's about halfway into my training, maybe 5 years into it, where I was kind of getting the hang of meditation. I was able to observe my mind and not engage. And I started hearing like a whole different part of my nature, of my humanness. Like it wasn't my mind, it was coming from a deeper place saying, you should, or it would be great if you would make devotional chant music in English. That'd be very helpful, not only to you, but to other people. And I was like, you've got to be kidding. I'm a registered dietitian,
That's funny.
It is, it's really funny. So, they call this inner voice so many different things, the Holy Spirit, wisdom, the universe, whatever the higher power, right? There is a difference between like our soul, which includes our mind, and or our ego. It's, some people call it the ego, and this higher power that we have access to. And even in the 12 steps, right? The 11th step is to have a meditation and prayer practice so that you can consciously contact God and hear his will. In essence, I believe that's what happened to me. I learned how to consciously contact God in meditation and prayer and hear his will. His will was create devotional chant music. And I resisted it for a really long time. I finally said, well, okay, I'll do that. And sure enough, I met a musician. Someone opened up like their recording studio and couldn't wait to do it with me. I could have never done it without this one man. And I have 3 albums of devotional chant music that people really enjoy and love. And I have one that hasn't been released yet. So there's this thing about this God's will, right? That's always going to challenge us against our own will. And our own will says, no way, or it resists, or I don't want to change. There's a lot of fear in that. But truly, truly, we can learn to tap into a deeper place. And I love, well, I think it's very significant that step is the 11th step, because people do such hard work in the 12 steps. It's so hard. You're going from 1 is even hard, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, all hard. 9, 10, you get to that 11th step, and mastering meditation and prayer is not easy. And sometimes you end up falling back down. You're like, oh, I can't find God's voice. All I hear is my own, wheels in my own cog going. But it's the gateway, right, to the 12th step, which is, if you master the 11th step, you're going to have a spiritual awakening. That's huge.
Yeah.
So anyway, I know that that's what happened to me. Then I ended up writing a book, and it's a combination of like Eastern, Western spirituality. It's called How to Meditate with Jesus. And it's yeah.
I saw that on your website. I wanted to ask you about that. Tell me a little bit about the book and kind of how you came about writing it.
So this is the story, right? Like, I'm trying to completely get over my anxiety through a meditation practice. And little by little, I just started listening to that guiding voice. And so I started writing down, like, my practice, what I was learning to do to overcome anxiety. And then that became a book. So my book is 8 steps. And I still will go through these 8 steps, like in the morning when I'm meditating. Now I don't, like, initially it might take you a little while, but now it takes me, like, I can go through those steps pretty fast. And honestly, it has to just be a period of your life until you kind of understand how to get to the space. And you don't even really need to meditate.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you too, because I know you mentioned in the beginning, which I can totally relate to. I remember I'd be in rehab and they'd say, "All right, guys, we're going to meditate," and I just couldn't shut my head off. And we were doing it for, I don't know, 2 minutes, sometimes a minute. How long did it take you before you kind of started to get in the groove of it? You were able to sit a little bit longer. You're starting to kind of not have as many distracting thoughts while you're doing it.
Well, I'll tell you, it really helps to understand our human, like our human nature. We have a body, right? And we're going to sit in that body in meditation, and we're going to go inward. And when we go inward, the first thing that shows up is our soul. And some people call this ego, our psyche. There's lots of words for it. And in our soul, in this one part of us, is our mind. All of our thoughts are coming from our soul. Our emotions are coming from our soul. We all have an individual, like your soul is so individual from mine. You have different thoughts, different emotions, and a will. So the mind, the emotions, and our free will. This is all coming from our soul. So when you sit still and you go inside, and you know normally we're ignoring our soul, right? We're just walking around being distracted. this is a focus. So you go in and your soul goes like, hey, hi, I've been trying to tell you this. And the mind goes off, and then all of a sudden you feel something, and then a desire like, I want a cup of coffee. So basically, if you just know that this is the process, when you sit there, your soul's going to come forward, and it's your challenge is really to be kind and listen. Listen to your soul. Listen to what it has to tell you. And, it might say that, wow, this morning, like I used to wake up and I would be so sad, and I didn't even know I was sad until I'd sit in meditation. And I'd end up crying or something. And I would have carried that around like the whole day, not knowing. So the meditation, when your soul comes forward and you start seeing it like, oh, I'm sad today, and you just accept that reality. Addicts have a hard time really accepting reality because they're avoiding the reality of their own soul, right? How they're feeling, the things that they really want in life, some of their thoughts. Now, if we talk about the mind, thoughts, all of our experiences are stored in our soul. So we get all sorts of random thoughts. Think of it like the fake news, like it's a computer. And you might have, like, your dad or a teacher told you, you're lazy, you're stupid, or whatever. That's stored in there. So part of meditation is just listening to your mind, and you can kind of figure out, like, that's just not true. I don't need to have that thought anymore. And we interrupt some of our thoughts. It's so important to not let our thoughts create our reality. We observe the thought, and if it's not true, we do all that we can to either like say something that is true, interrupt the thought with the true thought. We've got to throw away a lot of thoughts. And we have to process a lot of emotions, unfortunately, because a lot of them are stored in there. Because especially with people who have addicts, we've been, ignoring them, numbing them, distracting them for so long. We get like a lot stored inside of us. You sit in meditation, your soul comes forward like, hey, I've got this stuff stored in here. So there's a period of time where, the more you listen, the more you allow your truth to come out, the more your soul calms down. And the more you can find that inner peace, it's like right here in your heart, like you can feel it, and you can kind of feel it while you're watching your thoughts and feeling your feelings. So it's really knowing that we are a body, and we all have a soul, but we all have a deeper part, can be called higher power, can be called spirit. And we're accessing all three of those parts in meditation. So once you know that, it makes meditation kind of interesting, you know?
Oh yeah, I've always found it to be fascinating. And you know what? I've always, even when I had a hard time doing it, even if it was just for a little bit that I was able to sit there, when I was done, I always at least felt a little bit better, a little bit lighter almost. Does that make sense?
No, it makes a lot of sense, because even like the light, the dark to the light, like when you bring light in, which is awareness. Awareness is huge. So meditation is an awareness practice. It's becoming aware of your thoughts, your emotions, your desires, and becoming aware that we also have this higher power in us. So that little bit of awareness, that shining the light within, actually can really get rid of darkness. That, and it, who knows really how this works. I'm a science major, but Biblically it says darkness always, light always overcomes darkness. And it's true. Light is awareness. It's consciousness. It's just being aware. So when you like you said, you feel lighter, it's a truth. Like you've probably let something go during that meditation. I always feel better after meditation. Same, little lighter, my days a little bit more grace filled, like a little easier. Things flow a little bit better. So yeah, it's a powerful practice.
Yeah, and have you always had a relationship with God or higher power or spirit? Is that something that you've always had? Did you have to rekindle that? What was that like for you?
Yeah, it's a great question too, because I didn't grow up with any religion. My parents said this prayer at the dinner table, like, God is good and God is great, and we thank him for our food. Amen. We try to say it as fast as we could. So I had a feeling that God was good and God was great. And my connection to God or spirit, higher power, really was through nature. Like, I loved nature as a kid. And when I was in nature, I felt like, oh, God's here. That was really my initial connection with God. And then I think when I went through the divorce, I got disconnected from nature too. I was hanging out with my friends. It's all about friends, friends, friends. And I realize now, like when I need a little bit more God, I go to nature. I also, like I explained, I gave my life to Jesus at 24 because I just felt like I felt so powerless. And I think that the scripture, like the teachings of Jesus, are very beneficial to follow. Like forgive people, treat people, you know, um, like treat your enemies with love. It kind of does parallel the 12 steps. A lot of the things that the 12 steps says, Jesus is saying the same thing. So I got pretty spiritually enlightened by not just the biblical texts, but then when I went on to do my yoga and meditation training, I read a lot of the Eastern scriptural texts as well. And there's just so many parallels. They're all kind of saying the same thing. We have to die to ourself, which is that, like, we can't let our ego or our soul be living, like, be out there in front. We have to get in contact with this higher power, with God. So we have to have like a period where we're dying to that old self, right? And we renew ourselves when we connect to this higher power. Then we always, it's like a computer being plugged into the wall, right? Like there's a power source. When we're plugged into God as you understand, I love how Alcoholics Anonymous uses God as you understand, because God's hard to understand. And it comes little by little, and it comes individually for everybody. So, but once you find that connection to that God as you understand, you have more power. It's the bottom line. You're not at the whims of your ego or your soul. And that's where a lot of, I believe, that's where addiction's coming from.
Yeah, and I was going to ask you too, when you got off, when you stopped smoking the weed and stuff early on, did you go to 12 step stuff? Did you go to AA to have to put an end to that, or were you able to kind of cut that out and start living healthier on your own?
I'd say it was little by little I healed these pieces without having to go to AA. And, one of the things that healed my eating disorder is funny. It wasn't just becoming a registered dietitian. But I had a boyfriend that was very loving, and I became kind of part of his family. So that piece for me, like, it's so important that we all have community, and a community that reflects back to us our true nature, like you are loved, right? Like that's a real important piece of recovery. And I got that from him, and my eating disorder just sort of went away. And then I've worked for a lot of recovery centers.
Oh, cool.
Right. So, uh, I know all about the 12 steps. I started to just do one of the 12 steps called Celebrate Recovery.
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah.
It was at my church, and as I did it, I realized, wow, I've done these steps. And I did a lot of the steps actually in psychotherapy too. I didn't talk about that piece, but I did get into therapy after my divorce.
What was that
And
like?
therapy is interesting. You have to be careful because you really like, there's good therapists out there and there's bad therapists. So, I had a bad therapist at first, and that was really not helpful at all. But eventually, I had
When did you realize, oh, this is a bad therapist?
yeah, it was kind of after it was after somehow I ended up leaving that therapist. My ex-husband wanted that therapist, and I'm like, oh, okay. And I went on to get a new one, and then I realized how bad that ex-therapist was. They just had us talking about our negative feelings. That's it.
Oh, okay. So
And
you had a different therapist, realize, oh, this is good, and then kind of realize, oh, yeah, before wasn't as good.
right, like a good therapist ideally doesn't give you a lot of advice. They really help you to see who you are by asking you questions and allowing you to express yourself. And they're really just there going, yeah, I understand. I get it. And it kind of mirrors the type of relationship we end up really having with ourselves. Like we might be suffering and venting inside, but we have another side that says, yeah, I get it. I understand why you're feeling that way. And what do you think you could do about that? So it's interesting. If you have a good therapist, it'll eventually mirror the type of relationship you should have with yourself. And that brings you into this place of power that you can heal yourself. You don't need a therapist anymore. So I did get that therapist, and that was super helpful.
That's cool. I had to do therapy for 4 years while I was in a drug court program, which is a recovery program, through the court and everything. And
Mm.
I was resistant at first, but I had never really done therapy, and I didn't understand kind of how it worked, and I didn't understand the kind of the therapeutic values in it and how it could help you. And so I was forced to do it. But as time went on, it helped me a lot. Basically, it was something that I didn't expect would help, but ended up being pretty good for me. Were you open to it right away, or were you resistant a little bit in the beginning? What was it like for you when you first started?
Yeah, it's funny you bring up the word resistance because I think it's important that we all acknowledge we have resistance. That's our will. So there's God's will. It's all meant to be good for us basically, but our will go, yeah, no, I don't think so. Yeah, no, not for me. So I think almost in every challenge I've had where, you're going to have to reflect, get deeper, work hard, become disciplined. There's, oh, and every morning. So I have a meditation practice, I've had it forever. There's still a little resistance that comes up every single time before I go to meditate. And it's such a good way to just look at, our free will. It does have a choice, and it's strong, and it doesn't always want to do really what's best for us. So overcoming resistance is part of the battle. And again, it's like recognizing, oh, there's the resistance. There's that my like I like to sometimes look at my soul as a little child that just wants what it wants when it wants it. Like that child wants another cup of coffee. It wants to just lounge in the pajamas. It doesn't really want to go do what it perceives as work at all. And it's so funny. I just sometimes have to say, okay, I see you, little child, little Tonyah. But you're going to feel better, like after we meditate. And I take that child and I go meditate. So a lot of times, we're looking at this, this sort of parent-child relationship right inside of us. We've got like the parent would be more like the higher power. And the child is like our soul, our mind, and our emotions, and our free will, especially our free will. And a lot of times, there's people who've written about this resistance. A lot of times is the path that you need to take. It means it's going to be good for your soul. So things that you're really resistant to, those are sometimes the walls that we really need to break down, overcome, because that's the path our soul needs to take to learn something valuable. But it's going to resist it because it doesn't want to change.
Yeah, that's so interesting too, because it kind of brings me back to when I was first getting sober, and there was so much, and you kind of touched on this before too, just the fear of change, and like what is this going to look like without having alcohol or drugs, and you kind of touched on this too, where all of a sudden all these feelings were flooding in, and I had numbed out and escaped for so long, and it was kind of just all hitting me at once. Did you was it like that for you when you first kind of started to make this transformation and turn things around, and you gave your life to Jesus Christ? Was it hard to make that change while you were doing it?
Absolutely. I think there's a few people out there that have like this instantaneous, like, change it. But the majority of us, I think, that's why there's a low recovery rate, or, it's a struggle. We fall back because it's almost too much at once. And we don't really understand the process. So, and we don't have the support we need. A lot of people try to do this on their own. That's why it's so important to be in a recovery program or in therapy or group therapy. Go to your groups, because the support's so important. Because when you're alone, everything's much worse. Like everything's magnified almost when you're alone. Your feelings are magnified, and because you're all like focused here. And if you're in a group, you might be focused on somebody else that's sharing their feelings, and your feeling just naturally comes out because of their feeling. You don't even have to talk about your feelings. So, yeah, I'd have to say, it's been one thing to overcome, overcome the eating disorder, overcome the substance use, then I have no desire for alcohol or drugs, but I had some problems with codependency. So
I was just going to ask you about codependency.
like being in a relationship, and it's still kind of boiled down to, can I really be alone and have a tremendous amount of self-love? So I had to, I got into some relationships where I was pretty clean and sober, but I would get into a relationship with an addict.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So, and then, work on wanting to change him. And then I ended up in Al Anon. So now I realize that, you know, I think I've run the gamut of addictions.
You've checked it all off.
Yeah, I think so. And now I'm real peaceful. Like I still am single, and I'm so okay with that, which is great because I have, discrimination now, like what I'm looking for, not only with a partner, but in my life. Like, oh, I have control, self-control. That's really big. Self-control, like control over my soul. And that gives me this choice that, like, maybe now my choice is combined with God's and it's leading me into higher and higher places. And that's what it feels like.
Yeah, and that sounds like really positive stuff, and that's cool to hear. And I was going to ask you too, because you mentioned Al-Anon. What was your first take of Al-Anon?
Um, the one thing I just didn't like about Al Anon, honestly, is it seemed like there were a lot of the same story, like being told, like people are a little bit caught up in the story and really not able to get out of the story. So I do wish that I wish that there was some sort of a more of a therapeutic, like you learn more of a therapeutic take to Al Anon. You learn some mindsets, which is good. Like instead of having this thought, you have, I'm on my own path. So it does help manage like change your mind, which whenever you change your mind, ultimately it will lead to changing your emotions and your actions. So that's the good news. That did help me. Um, but the real goal, like it's for me, was to get out of that story altogether and be able to create new stories for myself. So I don't have to go to Al Anon and repeat that I'm stuck in this relationship and what do I do? Right now I'm not stuck in the relationship, and there's endless possibilities of what to do, and we don't realize that there's so many possibilities available to us when we connect into that higher power. It's like there's so much possibility, and a lot of times you'll hear the direction to go. So but it's good. It's a good thing. It's a good thing for women. It's another one of those steps.
Yeah, and that makes a lot of sense too as you're talking about it, because maybe it's a relationship that you're not with the person anymore, and it makes sense to kind of, hey, look, I'm not with that person anymore. I just want to kind of move on. I want to be done with it. I've healed from it. I've grown from it. I've learned some lessons from it. I just want to focus on something. That made a lot of sense to me, and I guess it would make sense too that maybe a relationship, so like maybe a mother going to Al-Anon who has a son, she's always going to be that son's mom. They're always going to be a continuous relationship. So that would make more sense maybe to continue to go to Al-Anon versus maybe someone who was just in a relationship for a little bit. If that does that make sense to you?
Yeah, it does, but for the sake of like all the women who do go to Al-Anon, like as their general meeting, I want to say that one of the goals in life in general is to live and let live. Like, let somebody live. It's so hard because we want to control. So, that's what they're learning. They're learning to live your own life and let somebody else live their own life, and they have consequences and lessons to learn, and you have consequences and lessons to learn. But if we're always focused on that other person, we're not actually living our own life and learning our own lessons. And so it's both, it's just this idea that somehow we have to, in whatever place we're in or what relationship we're in, is to kind of always be going into what's our truth? Who are we? What's our truth? That's the focus. So, if your truth is, I need to leave this relationship, then that's your truth. But if your truth is, I'm just going to learn, I love this person so much, I'm just going to learn to walk my own walk and let this person walk their own walk. So it's a lot of, recovering. I had heard once, like, recovering is recovering your truth, your honest to goodness self. And it's never going to be perfect. So, but you've recovered your personal identity and your destiny for your life. That's recovery. It doesn't mean that you're perfect, that you have this relationship to yourself and you're able to create your life. That feels really good, to be in your life, creating what you think maybe even you've been called to do in this lifetime. That's the 12th step again of spiritual awakening, so that you can go out. It says serve other people, but it's really serve your best, serve other people by serving what you're placed here on the planet to do. Find purpose and meaning in your own life.
Yeah, and that brings me to a point too, because it seems like with your website and everything that you do and the people that you help and everything, it seems like you're aware of your purpose. You have a pretty solid awareness of your own purpose. How did you get to that? Was it just kind of, you turned your life over to Jesus, you turned things around, you weren't drinking or using anymore, you started meditating. Did it all kind of fall into place, or was this something that you kind of just piece by piece you started to really understand your purpose?
I'd say it's kind of the second. Like, I don't know if you can really find your purpose when you're in an addiction, because the addiction kind of makes you go from the past to the future a lot. It's like this situation, and we're going to find our purpose more in the present moment in relationship to that higher power. So as I was able to overcome those things and really begin to recognize that connection with the higher power, like I told you, I started getting fed. This is your purpose. And it made sense to me. Like, I could combine all of my science, and it just has a purpose. So there's like deep desires in us that we kind of have to unlayer this stuff, and you have to be sober kind of to get to it, because the especially drugs and alcohol tend to ignite that egoic part of us. It gets louder, right? That's why people kind of yell and get kind of like a different personality almost when they're high. And you want to be as real as you can, so you can find that real purpose that maybe you've known about it for a long time, but we're afraid to go down that path. So yeah, for me, it's like I said, that turning point was learning how to meditate. But the what happened was I learned self-love and self-acceptance through meditation. And then I could hear these deeper parts of myself. And it's kind of interesting, because it becomes easier. Life is so much easier. There's a lot more rest to it when you're not like trying to avoid. yourself, but you're loving yourself.
Yeah, and I like that you talk about the self-love and self-acceptance, because when I was out there drinking and using, I was trying to outrun myself. I was trying to escape myself. I was trying to run away from my reality. I was trying to numb out, and I just was avoiding. And I like that you talk about that self acceptance and self love, because that was something I really had to work towards in recovery if I was going to get somewhat comfortable sober. It was a big deal, you know.
Yeah, it's a big deal. That's why people talk so much about self-love, but I don't know if it's the ultimate thing in life, but it might be really close to being, is finding that, self-care onto the path of self-love. And, if you have enough love for yourself, then you can almost change any habit. So it's interesting, and it is embracing a lot of pain that we have stored inside. It's just, we go back, and then once you've embraced all the past pain, current pains come into your life, and you're just like, oh, I know, I'm embracing that pain too. I just lost this close relationship, and that's painful, and I'm like, oh well, I'm just gonna, you know be compassionate towards myself right now. Self love. So it's a moment by moment, like kind of consciously, like, how do I love myself all the time? All the time. It's important.
Yeah, and I want to ask you, Tanya, what would your advice be to someone that doesn't know God or have a higher power, or but wants to kind of grow spiritually? How would you advise them on kind of starting that journey? Maybe just maybe they're not going to get it overnight, but just working on taking a step towards somewhat of a spiritual life.
I would say there's so many paths. So, they say all these paths lead to the same place, but, you know, the ones that most people would say is make sure you're in a recovery program, 12-step recovery program. You could go to church, start learning about what, a church that you vibe with, because there's not, there's a lot of different churches. So go around, find one that kind of has your vibe. There's heavy metal churches, there's gospel churches, there's all sorts of different churches. So and then you'll start to hear some scripture, and like I said, like whether it's scripture from the Bible or scripture from the Western or the Eastern scriptural texts, they're all kind of saying the same thing. And it's really a good way to reset your mind, studying the life and teachings of Jesus. That'll make you more spiritual for sure. Spend more time in nature. Just appreciating creation is an interesting way to become more spiritual. So there's lots of different paths. Find a friend that you think is really spiritual. Hang out with them, right? Find a group. Maybe it's even a yoga studio that they're a little bit more spiritually oriented. So there's a lot of ways.
Yeah, I think that's a lot of you named a bunch. That's a lot of cool advice, and I think that's you covered a lot of them. Any one of the ones that I was thinking of, So thank you for that. I just want to ask. I've almost had you on for an hour now, Tanya. What's next for you? What are your next goals with anything? Whether it's the life coaching, the helping others, any music stuff, writing. What's coming up next for you?
So much fun. I'm working on developing an online course for my book so people can just work through it in an easy way. I actually want to do more devotional chant gatherings, just singing devotional chant. That's really fun, a very unique thing to do. And I want to hold retreats, a retreat in Costa Rica, somewhere that's got a lot of nature. And then I would teach about things like anxiety, how to meditate, um, emotional clarity. I have these cards that I created to help people identify their feelings, because that's really hard too. You go through my deck of cards and you're like, oh, there it is. That's what I'm feeling. So I have a lot of different tools, and I can actually teach a yoga class and meditation class. So that's what I want to do. I'd love to gather people and chant and learn meditation and learn some skills for overcoming anxiety. And that's really on the horizon for me.
That's all great stuff. I want to know too about the cards, because I remember reading about that on your site. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, my cards are it's a deck of cards, like it's just like cards, 54 cards. And on the front of the card, it has a graphic design of an emotion. Let's say it's not valued. And then underneath the card, it says not valued. So a lot of times you can go through the cards, and like if you're overwhelmed, you probably have like 5 different feelings going on. Like, I'm angry, I feel manipulated, I feel not valued. And you place all the cards down. And on the back of the card, it has the opposite. So you can say, oh yeah, it has the definition and the opposite definition. You read the definition and then it really clarifies it. Like, that's exactly what I'm feeling. And it's funny, as soon as you identify a feeling, you already feel lighter. Just identifying the feeling lightens you, like, oh, I feel manipulated. That's what it is. Because you're walking around for days going, why do I feel so off? And then I put some tools, like conversational tools, in the deck. So if it's some conversation you have to have with someone else, I have an outline of how to tell them, by the way, I feel manipulated. It really is a way to increase communication, because what we do a lot in relationships is we'll point to the other person and say, you're doing this and you're doing that and you. And
Yeah.
that person just gets defensive. But if you, from your heart, and this just comes from your heart, I'm really feeling manipulated by this. It's a game changer. All of a sudden the person goes, oh, I'm sorry, let me hear more about that. So it's a tool that I developed when I was going through therapy, and I didn't know how to identify my feelings.
That's cool stuff. That is, and it's funny too, because as you're saying that, it brings me back to early therapy for me, and also kind of the group stuff when I was in treatment and everything for addiction, and we'd have to go around the room and we'd have to say our name. They'd say the nature of your disease. They'd say either addict, alcoholic, whatever you were going through.
Right.
And then they would say name 2 feelings, and a lot of times, and don't say like feeling good, or and a lot of us would be sitting there, and our first week just got out of detox, and man, it was hard to come up with stuff. It was
Right.
hard to, I felt disconnected, and those cards sound really cool. And I could see what you said. Look, just being able to identify how you're feeling makes you feel a little bit lighter. And I don't know, that's really interesting to me, because there was a lot of times where I was feeling multiple things at once and I just could not put a finger on it.
Exactly. It's so helpful. I never spoke I feel until my, like, maybe late 30s. So, it's a matter of, this is an important part of our soul. Our feelings really alert us to how we're experiencing life. And so it's so helpful to say, man, I'm feeling bullied, or whatever it is, I feel not cared for. I feel not listened to. These little micro feelings that just build up. And then all of a sudden I'm like, I want to drink, So you can work with them like one-on-one, like, oh, I'm feeling this, so I can do this, and oh, I'm feeling all 5 of these. No wonder I'm overwhelmed right now. I need to go for a walk, clear my head, but at least I know. So yeah, it's super helpful. It's on my website. They're available to purchase. So it's a good thing. I have them for men, women, and groups. So you can do your own sex. Very helpful.
That is cool. Well, Tonyah, I appreciate you coming on here. You have so much interesting knowledge and experience, and have overcome a lot, and have had a great transformation. And it's just cool to hear how you deal with stuff today, and how centered that it's just I love talking to people that have been through something, found a way to turn it around, and now go on to help a bunch of people, and inspire a bunch of people, so I just want to say thank you. I appreciate you coming on here and talking to all of us about all this stuff. I just want to ask before we stop, what is your website? I believe it was yahlight.com. Is that right?
Right. I have 2 websites. One is Yahlight, YAHLIGHT.com. And my other one is my name, TONYAH, Tonyah Dee, DEE.com, TonyahDee.com.
Awesome. Tonyah, thank you so much.
Thank you, Drew. Blessings.
All right, you made it through another episode. Thanks again, and if you'd like to collaborate or come on the show, please email me at thesoberfixpodcast@gmail.com. Have a great day.